They fined me $1,200 for a fence they said was 1 inch too high, though the survey showed it at exactly 42 inches. The notice came certified, dated July 3, 2024, with a threat to lien my home in 15 days if I didn't comply. That's when I knew they'd picked the wrong man to bully. Welcome to my channel. I'm Nate from Lakewood, Colorado, civil engineer by trade, widower by bad luck, and apparently now a full-time student of HOA warfare. If you've ever wrestled with a neighborhood board that forgot who actually owns the dirt beneath their shoes, you're in the right place. Pull up a chair, pour your coffee, and tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I bought the house 6 years ago after my wife died. She'd wanted a garden, and the backyard slope was perfect for vines, not fences. I built the trellis myself, cedar posts, treated, sealed, and measured 3 times. When the first letter from the Silver Pines HOA came, I thought it was a mistake. They said my non-compliant structure disrupted visual harmony. That phrase stuck in my head like static. At first, I played nice. I called the HOA office, asked for clarification. The manager, a woman named Ruth Denton, sounded polite enough until she dropped the real message. "Mr. Callahan, you agreed to the bylaws. We expect full compliance." Her tone carried the weight of 1,000 little tyrannies. I told her I'd review the documents. She told me to expect a fine. That night I spread the bylaws across my kitchen table, the same table where Laura and I had eaten our last dinner together. The words blurred, sections, clauses, amendments, a bureaucratic maze dressed in Helvetica. I noticed one phrase repeated, within the common interest community. I didn't remember signing for any common beyond my driveway. 3 days later, a man in a khaki vest showed up while I was fixing the gutter. He snapped photos without a word. When I asked what he was doing, he pointed at my vines. "Inspection," he said, flashing a laminated badge with HOA compliance. His truck had the same yellow stripe as a sheriff's cruiser. He left a carbon copy of a citation tucked in my doorframe. I stared at it until the ink bled in the heat. The vines were Laura's. She'd drawn them in her sketchbook. Front porch covered in green, little lanterns hanging between leaves. Seeing them called a violation hit harder than I'd admit. I poured a whiskey that night and told myself it was just paperwork, not grief wearing a new badge. 2 days after that, Ruth emailed me the lien threat. $1,200 fine, escalating at 10% per week, plus attorney fees as incurred. My hands shook, not from fear, but the insult. I opened my engineering maps on the kitchen counter, tracing property lines, coordinates, easements. That's when I noticed something strange. The boundary line the HOA claimed wasn't the same as the one on my deed. Their map ended 12 feet short of my retaining wall. I went down to the county clerk's office in Jefferson County the next morning. The clerk, an older man with coffee breath and an unbuttoned flannel, looked up my parcel number. "Looks like the HOA's map predates the 1998 subdivision amendment," he said, flipping through scanned PDFs. "They never updated after the utility easement got reclassified." He leaned closer. "Technically, that strip behind your fence isn't HOA-maintained land anymore." That was the first breath of oxygen I'd felt in weeks. But I didn't say a word to Ruth. Not yet. Let them stack their paperwork. I'd need evidence, certified, time-stamped, verifiable. Back home, I started a folder labeled SPHOA Case. Every email, every photo, every voicemail. I even printed the inspection shots they'd uploaded to their portal. My engineer's brain liked Orden. Oi, if they wanted a fight in inches and clauses, I'd give them both, with decimals. Still, part of me hated the silence in that house. The vines, the fence, Laura's wind chime. They were the last pieces of her I could still tend to. Losing that fence felt like losing her again, just slower. I wasn't going to let anyone take it. A week later, the HOA called a special meeting for ongoing violations and community integrity. I attended. About 20 residents sat on metal folding chairs, sipping lukewarm coffee. Ruth, perfectly coiffed, called the meeting to order. "We must ensure consistent aesthetics," she said, eyeing me directly. When I stood to speak, she interrupted. "You may file an appeal, Mr. Callahan, but fines continue during review." I didn't raise my voice. "You're fining me for 12 feet you don't own." Murmurs. Someone coughed. Ruth smiled tightly. "Our maps are accurate as recorded. Please sit down." But her eyes flickered, just for a second, when I mentioned 12 feet. After the meeting, my neighbor Daniel, retired firefighter, red flannel, always smelled faintly of diesel, clapped me on the shoulder. "Don't let 'em push you, Nate. They pulled the same stunt on me over a mailbox last year." He offered his thermos. "Black coffee fixes most things, except bureaucrats." I smiled. "We'll see about that." That night I scanned every document again, aligning deed coordinates with Google Earth. The offset was undeniable, 12 feet by 62, 744 square feet, small to most, but everything to me. That strip was Laura's vines, the fence, the slope, the memory, and by law, it was mine. The clock was ticking on their 15-day lien threat. But I wasn't ready to fight loud. Not yet. Instead, I called my friend Marcy, real estate attorney, sharp tongue, ink-stained cuffs. She answered on speaker while riffling papers. "If they file that lien, it's a recorded instrument. That means they'd be claiming interest in property outside their governance. That's messy. Document everything, Nate. We'll let them hang themselves in the paperwork first." I liked the sound of that. Marcy didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, she'd drafted 2 certified letters, one to the HOA demanding verification of their boundary claim, and another to the county's property assessor confirming my parcel's legal coordinates. She even had me sign them in front of the notary at the UPS store, the stamp clicking down like a starting gun. When Ruth got the letter, her reply came fast, almost too fast. "Mr. Callahan," she wrote, "our survey data is proprietary to Silver Pines Association. Unauthorized use may constitute misappropriation." I laughed out loud. A survey isn't a trade secret, it's public record. That's when I realized they weren't confident. They were bluffing. The next HOA notice accused me of harassment of staff for unauthorized contact with administrative personnel. It felt surreal. Kafka rewritten for suburbia. They even copied the local police department, as if I'd kicked down a door instead of mailing a letter. I called Marcy again. "They're escalating." She said, "Good. It means they're nervous." We decided to build the case quietly, layer by layer. I pulled the CCRs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, from their website and read every page. That's where I found it. Section 4.2.3, Maintenance of Common Area. It listed every parcel by lot number. Mine wasn't there. Knowledge. Nugget number 1. Under most U.S. common interest community laws, an HOA only has authority over parcels expressly recorded in its governing documents. Anything excluded from the plat or amended later falls outside their jurisdiction, regardless of what a board believes. I highlighted that section, printed it, and pinned it to my corkboard above the kitchen counter. One nail forever. I-clause they'd violated. Meanwhile, Ruth called a compliance review. Their board met every second Wednesday at the clubhouse, a brick building that smelled like overbrewed coffee and dusted carpet cleaner. I walked in wearing a pressed shirt and carried a thin binder. They didn't know the binder held certified survey maps, a copy of my deed, and correspondence from the county assessor's office confirming the 12-foot reclassification. When I took my seat, Ruth leaned forward. "Mr. Callahan, continuing violations accrue daily. You're at $1,800 plus administrative fees." I smiled. "Before we discuss money, maybe we should define violation, because as of April 16, 1998, this fence isn't under your jurisdiction." I slid the assessor's letter across the table. The paper made a sound, a dry slap that turned a few heads. Her expression didn't change much, but her pen stopped moving. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Public record. Same place you should have." The board treasurer, a nervous man named Leonard, adjusted his glasses. "This seems technical. We'll review with counsel." "Please do," I said, standing. "But until then, any further fines will be considered harassment under CRS 3833.3-209.5. You might want to read that before the next letter." Outside, the air tasted like victory and pine sap. Daniel was waiting near the curb. "How'd it go?" "Let's just say the paper hit harder than my words." He chuckled. "That's the best kind of hit." A week passed. No calls, no notices. I started to think they'd backed off. until a bright orange tag appeared on my mailbox. HOA notice. Unauthorized structure on easement. Removal required within 72 hours. It wasn't about the fence this time, it was the mailbox. The same one that had stood there since I bought the place. They were probing for weakness. That night, I sat on my porch watching headlights flash through the trees. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. I thought about Laura again, how she hated conflict, how she'd tell me to pick my battles. But some battles pick you. So I went deeper. I requested HOA financials under the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act, Section 3117. Right to inspect records within 30 days. They tried to delay. I reminded them of the statute. On day 29, they emailed a PDF, heavily redacted. But redaction leaves clues. You can still see totals, columns, and dates. A pattern emerged. Landscaping payments to Green Ridge Maintenance LLC every quarter. Exact amounts, no variance, $18,400 each. When I looked up the company, it was registered to the HOA president's husband. That's when the anger solidified into purpose. Before I forget, for those of you who've ever tangled with an HOA, are you firmly against them, or have you found one that actually helps its residents? If you've had to stand your ground, drop a line in the comments. And if you haven't, trust me, read your bylaws tonight. Some of you have HOAs watching these videos, so leave your message for them here. I wasn't ready to expose the conflict of interest yet. Timing mattered. Let Ruth think the mailbox fight was working. Let her believe I was worn down. Over the next 2 weeks, I documented everything. Dates, times, even the tire marks where the compliance truck parked. I kept a daily log in a spiral notebook, page after page of neat handwriting. Part therapy, part evidence. On May 22nd, they crossed a line. I came home to find a note taped to my door. Wellness check requested, unresponsive homeowner. The sheriff's deputy was polite but confused. We got a call from the HOA saying they were worried, he said. He looked around my spotless living room, the stacked binders, the humming coffee pot. You seem fine. Just fine, I said, handing him my ID. He nodded, apologize, and left shaking his head. That was their game, death by nuisance, but each act made them sloppier. I installed a doorbell camera and a motion sensor under the eave, both within the property line. I even measured the exact footage from curb to foundation, 62 feet, 4 inches, just in case they accused me of encroachment. By early June, I had 52 pages of documentation, 9 videos, and a timeline that could make any regulator salivate. Marcy was impressed. You're meticulous, she said. Engineer's curse. Keep it up, she replied. We're going to need all of it when we file. But I had a different idea. Filing meant court. I wanted leverage, something that would make them come to me. So I started researching land use assignments, easements, and something called beneficiary rights transfer. 3 nights later, I found it, a dormant clause in the subdivision's original 1985 covenant. It allowed purchase of defunct community amenities, like old drainage parcels, by adjacent lot owners. The HOA had ignored it because it was too small to matter, but that clause, still on record, covered a narrow strip of land right next to my fence, the one they kept citing. If I bought that parcel from the county for back taxes, $312.40, I'd not only own the strip, I'd gain legal control of the HOA's access gate easement that ran through it. I stared at the screen for a long minute, pulse ticking. Then I whispered to the empty house, Laura, I think I just found our 12 feet of justice. I printed the form, signed it, and mailed it certified the next morning. The parcel transfer posted to the county database on June 14th at 10:42 a.m. I kept refreshing the page just to watch the little green recorded icon appear next to my name. That single digital stamp meant the HOA's access gate now crossed land I legally owned. The irony was almost poetic. They'd spent months trying to find me for a fence, and now they'd have to ask permission to open their own gate. Still, I told no one. Secrecy was leverage's best friend. I went about my days like nothing had changed, mowing the yard, chatting with Daniel over coffee, waving at neighbors who didn't yet realize a quiet revolution had already begun beneath their cul-de-sac. Ruth must have sensed something, though. Her tone in emails turned colder, more clipped. Then the next volley landed, a notice of non-compliance hearing, scheduled for July 1st, citing continued obstruction of common passage. They claimed the gate's access code malfunctioned due to resident interference. I hadn't touched the gate, but I knew what they were doing, building a record to justify enforcement. The problem for them was that enforcement now required entry across property I owned. Marcy smirked when I told her, "Don't stop them. Let them make the first illegal step. That's trespass, plain and simple." "Won't that escalate things?" She shrugged, swirling her coffee. "Sure, but escalation under your control is called strategy." Over the next week, I installed a small trail camera aimed at the gate post. Motion activated, time-stamped. I didn't hide it. Colorado's a one-party consent state for recordings, so long as you're involved or protecting property. My name on that parcel made me both. When the hearing day arrived, I didn't go to the clubhouse. Instead, I stayed home, camera feed open on my laptop. At 7:16 p.m., 3 figures in reflective vests approached the gate. One swiped a keycard, another forced the latch. The metal squealed, then clicked open. I took screenshots, faces, times, coordinates. Evidence doesn't need anger, it just needs clarity. 2 days later, I filed a trespass report with the county sheriff. The deputy who showed up was the same one from the so-called wellness check. He recognized me immediately. "Back again, huh?" "Guess so. Only this time they crossed the line. Literally." He studied the documents, nodding slowly. "You're saying this gate sits on your parcel now?" I handed him the recorded deed. "As of June 14th, county verified." He whistled low. "Well, that's new." He photographed the gate, wrote his report, and promised a copy for my file. I thanked him, offered coffee, and watched his cruiser roll down the hill. The neighborhood lights blinked on one by one, each porch hiding stories of compliance and quiet resentment. Later that night, Daniel came over with his thermos. "You really bought the land?" "Back tax sale. $312 and change." He let out a slow laugh. "You turned their front door into your driveway." "Something like that." We sat there listening to the crickets, the occasional thud of a screen door. For the first time in months, I felt the tension lift a little, but Ruth wouldn't let it rest. The next morning, she emailed all residents a bulletin. "Unauthorized obstruction, legal action pending." She didn't name me, but everyone knew. My phone buzzed with texts, curiosity, sympathy, even a few offers of beer and support. The cracks in her authority had begun to show. I compiled everything into a single binder: emails, photos, recorded deeds, sheriff's report, certified letters, tabbed and numbered. It looked like a miniature trial in 3-ring form. Marcy said it was time to prep the counter notice, a formal cease and desist backed by the recorded trespass and property ownership. Before mailing it, I read through the HOA bylaws again. That's when another oddity surfaced. Section 7.1, Board Term Limits. It stated directors shall serve a maximum of 2 consecutive 3-year terms. Ruth had been president since 2015, 3 terms running, violation of their own rules. I printed it and slid it behind a red tab labeled Integrity. That discovery felt like flipping a hidden switch. The HOA's power depended on residents believing the board was legitimate. Show it wasn't, and their pyre of paper collapses. I wanted to hear from you. Where's your line with HOAs? Should they be able to patrol driveways, decide paint colors, and peek over fences? Or should property mean personal sovereignty? Leave your thoughts below. It's a debate this community needs to have. The 4th of July weekend brought another surprise. A letter from the HOA's attorney, a stiff 2-page demand for immediate cessation of interference with community access. It cited potential injunctions and damages exceeding $25,000. Marcy read it, snorted. "They're bluffing. Injunctions require clean hands. Trespass voids that. So we just wait? We wait, and we document." Waiting turned out to be easier than expected because I had a project, repainting the old trellis Laura loved. The smell of cedar and oil paint mixed with the summer heat, grounding me in something real. By mid-July, I heard rumors Ruth planned an emergency meeting to authorize legal spending against me. That would be her mistake. To approve litigation, the HOA needed a quorum and notice to all members per state law. Skipping that would violate their own due process. I spent the evening before the meeting printing the relevant statute and tucking it into the binder. Each sheet felt like armor. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was protecting everyone who'd ever been steamrolled by a board that forgot its limits. At sunrise, I walked the property line one more time, measuring each stake, checking the camera battery, breathing in the cool resin scent off the pines. The day felt charged, like the air before a storm. Something was about to shift. I could feel it in my bones. The emergency meeting took place on July 18th. The clubhouse lot was jammed, sedans nosed against curbs, pickup trucks half on the grass. Inside, the air conditioning hummed over voices pitched too high for comfort. I sat in a back row, binder resting on my knees, pretending to be another neighbor, killing time. Ruth stood at the front with her usual composure. Linen blazer, clipboard, pearls. "Tonight's agenda," she began, "is an authorization vote to protect our community's interests against obstruction by a single homeowner." Her eyes didn't have to find me. They already knew where I was. A few murmurs rippled. Leonard, the treasurer, cleared his throat. Ruth, was notice mailed per section 3.5? He asked. She gave him a smile sharp enough to cut thread. "Posted on the bulletin board 3 days ago." That wasn't notice, and every board member in the room knew it. I waited for the right moment. When Ruth asked for a motion, I stood. "Excuse me, under State Statute 3833.33081, any board meeting authorizing litigation must be announced at least 7 days in advance to all members. Failure to do so renders any vote void." Her lips parted, but I kept going. "Also, before you proceed, your own bylaws, Section 7.1, limit officers to 2 terms. You've served 3, Ruth, which means any action under your presidency may be ultra vires. That's Latin for beyond authority." The silence that followed was thick enough to hear paper settling. Then Leonard muttered, "He's right." Ruth tried to recover. "We'll confer with counsel." "No need," I said, opening my binder. "Counsel already replied to my attorney. You're trespassing on private property and violating your own charter. If you'd like, I can distribute copies." I walked to the front, placed 3 stapled packets on the folding table, and returned to my seat. The sound of the papers hitting plastic was the only thing louder than my heartbeat. For the first time, Ruth didn't finish a meeting. She adjourned abruptly, voice flat, and slipped through the side door. Daniel met me outside, grinning. "You dropped a nuke in there." "Paperwork," I said, "the quiet kind." Knowledge nugget number 2. Most state HOA laws define board actions taken without required notice as voidable, and any homeowner can challenge them within a set time, often 60 days. Keep every dated document. Time is your friend. The next morning, my mailbox overflowed. Half the neighborhood had shoved notes inside. "Thank you. About time someone stood up. Can you help me with my fine?" The rebellion had gone grassroots. A local reporter called 3 days later. She'd heard whispers of an HOA overreach case and wanted to verify records. I didn't confirm or deny, just said, "Everything you need is public." I left the binder open on my counter, knowing she'd eventually request it. By the first week of August, the HOA's insurance carrier sent a notice of review. Routine, they claimed, after an incident of board dispute. Translation: the insurer smelled exposure. The gate trespass had triggered a potential liability claim. Daniel brought beer that night, 2 cold bottles sweating on my porch railing. "Think they'll back off now?" "They'll try to settle it quietly," I said. "But there's still rot in the structure. I can fix a fence, but not hypocrisy." He raised an eyebrow. "So what's next?" "Let them make the next mistake. Then I'll show my cards." And they did. August 10th, 9:47 a.m., a citation slid under my door. Violation: unauthorized signage. They meant the small, private access, no trespassing plaque I'd mounted on my newly acquired strip. The irony was beautiful. Marcy laughed over the phone. "They just cited you for a sign on land you own. That's harassment squared." "Exactly what I needed," I said. I filed a second police report, attached the deed, and forwarded it to the insurer copied on all communications. The clock was ticking now. The insurer had 30 days to investigate before deciding on coverage. If they denied it, the board would lose legal defense funding. Before heading to bed that night, I checked the trail camera footage. There she was, Ruth herself, standing at the gate, trespassing at the sign. She leaned in, took a photo with her phone, and left. The timestamp glowed, 9:47 a.m., proof of personal involvement. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. It just waits for the right file format. For those watching, a question worth chewing on. When an HOA fines a homeowner for protecting their own property, is that governance or extortion? Where's your line? Comment below, or at least like the video so more people see what these boards can become. By late August, the dominoes began to tremble. Leonard resigned quietly, citing health reasons. The secretary followed, refusing to sign checks without full board authorization. Ruth was left with one ally and a community that no longer trusted her. That's when she made her biggest mistake. She tried to lock the gate permanently, claiming security concerns. But the padlock clamped onto my post, on my parcel. I didn't cut it. I called the sheriff instead. When the same deputy arrived, he smiled. "We meeting monthly now?" "Seems so. Want to see the new lock?" He photographed it, wrote another report, and radioed dispatch. Within an hour, an inspector from the county showed up to verify boundaries. Neutral authority on record. Exactly what I'd been waiting for. Under the fading evening light, the inspector traced his laser across the property marker, checked the parcel map on his tablet, and said, "Gate anchor's definitely on private land. HOA's got no jurisdiction here." The deputy nodded. "So they're trespassing again?" "Affirmative," the inspector said, stamping his clipboard. That stamp, the dull thunk of ink on paper, was the sweetest sound I'd heard all summer. The county inspector's report hit the public record 2 days later. Short, clinical, lethal. Encroachment by HOA structure onto private parcel 18B confirmed. Recommend removal or relocation within 30 days to ensure compliance. Those 30 days might as well have been a countdown clock strapped to Ruth's credibility. Marcy called the moment it posted. "We just won. The first inning. Don't swing yet." "I won't," I said, though my pulse disagreed. I spent that week keeping my routine surgical. Jog before sunrise, measure fence posts, coffee, work. But the HOA doubled down. They ordered 3 more inspections, each one a truck idling at the curb, while a compliance officer snapped pictures like paparazzi. Every click of that camera went straight into my growing digital archive. Then came the harassment montage in full color. Notice about trash bins visible for more than 15 minutes past collection. Warning about unapproved exterior lighting fixture. Citation for grass height exceeding 3.25 inches. It was comedy until it wasn't. The tone of their letters shifted, less bureaucratic, more personal. One note ended with, "We suggest you consider relocating to a community better suited to your temperament." That one I framed. Daniel found me pacing on the porch one night. "You okay?" "They're trying to make me crack." He took a slow sip from his thermos. "Then don't crack, document." That became my mantra. By August 25th, I had 103 individual documents, each numbered, dated, and cross-referenced. Marcy said, "This is the kind of file regulators dream about." But even dream files don't stop human spite. On September 2nd, while I was at work, someone scraped a key across my truck door. Long, deliberate diagonal. The security camera caught only a shadow and the gleam of a silver badge lanyard. I didn't press charges. It would only feed the noise, but it hardened something inside me. That night I sat at my kitchen table under the soft hum of the fridge, flipping through the binder. I paused at the red tab. Integrity. The clause about term limits stared back like an invitation. Ruth's presidency wasn't just over, it was legally null. Every fine, every vote, every threat she'd issued since 2021 was voidable. "Marcy," I said over the phone, "how long do we have to challenge ultra-vires acts?" 2 years, generally. And if we add evidence of self-dealing, payments to Greenridge Maintenance, LLC, then you're not talking civil challenge, you're talking criminal exposure, misuse of association funds. That was it, the leverage fuse ready to light. But even while building the bomb, I couldn't ignore the fear beat creeping in. One night I woke at 2 a.m. to tapping on the front window. Just branches in the wind, maybe. Still, I sat in the dark with a baseball bat across my lap until dawn. The vines outside brushed the glass like whispers from Laura, reminding me why I started all this. Not revenge, but to defend the small piece of peace we'd built together. When the HOA issued a new special assessment proposal to cover legal costs, $600 per household, I knew the endgame had begun. They were trying to fund their war with our wallets. I called Daniel and a few neighbors. 7 showed up that night, all tired, all angry. We sat around my living room surrounded by piles of printed notices. I laid out the timeline and evidence like a field commander. They've broken 3 state statutes, 2 clauses of their own bylaws, and 1 unspoken law of decency. But if we move too fast, they'll cry defamation. We need precision. The group agreed to elect me interim spokesperson for a residents' coalition. We called it Silver Pines Neighbors for Accountability, SPNA. Catchy, bureaucratic enough to sound legitimate. Knowledge nugget number 3. In most states, homeowners in an HOA can form an independent association or committee to demand audits, propose reforms, or petition for removal of board members, provided they gather signatures from a percentage of homeowners, often 20% to 33%. Always check your state's community statutes. We gathered signatures quietly. By September 14th, we had 42, nearly half the community. Ruth caught wind and blasted an email accusing us of sowing division. Irony practically dripped off the screen. For viewers following this saga, a question that stirs more fights than politics. How far should an HOA's control reach past your front door? Lawn height, mailbox color, holiday lights. Where's the line between community standards and personal freedom? Drop your take below. It tells me what kind of world we're defending. By late September, Marcy finalized a cease and desist packet. Trespass evidence, term limit violation, misappropriation risk. But we held it back 1 more week. I wanted Ruth to make the next biggest mistake, something undeniable. She didn't disappoint. October 2nd, 7:08 a.m., the trail camera caught her again. This time she was prying at the latch on my gate with a screwdriver. When the motion sensor light snapped on, she froze, looked straight at the lens, then walked off fast. Timestamp burned into the footage. That was my reversal number 1, the secret leverage fully armed. I called Marcy. We've got her. Personal trespass, fiduciary breach, term limit violation, and conflict of interest. She exhaled a laugh. Congratulations, Nate. You're holding a live grenade. Use it wisely. I smiled into the dawn. Don't worry. I'm an engineer. I know when to pull the pin. The following morning, I transferred every file onto a flash drive labeled SPHOA Evidence Master. The sticker I used was from an old engineering project, bright orange, easy to spot, impossible to forget. I slid it into a small lockbox with a single brass key, tucked it behind the cereal boxes in the pantry. The irony wasn't lost on me. Hiding truth behind cardboard Cheerios felt like the safest spot in Silver Pines. Marcy and I planned the set piece like a courtroom rehearsal. The county inspector's confirmation, the video of Ruth prying the latch, and the term limit clause will do the heavy lifting, she said. But the emotional payoff matters too. These neighbors need to see courage, not vengeance. Public meeting? I asked. She nodded. Then exactly. You have to make the truth impossible to look away from. The HOA's annual budget meeting was scheduled for October 14th. Public, recorded, open to residents. Perfect stage. The week leading up felt endless. Ruth's camp tried to rally support, sending emails about malicious actors undermining community unity. I stayed silent. Each message only made them look more desperate. Meanwhile, Daniel printed copies of the inspector's report, 22 in total, ready for distribution. That night before the meeting, I walked the property line one last time. The air was sharp, autumn biting into the pines. The vines along the fence had turned bronze, curling gently in the wind. I ran my fingers across the cedar slats Laura and I had painted together years ago. Tomorrow, I whispered. We finish it. The clubhouse was packed that evening, standing room only. Folding chairs creaked, voices murmured, and the fluorescent lights flickered just enough to set nerves on edge. Ruth stood behind the podium, crisp suit, tight smile, stack of notes that looked like a manifesto. "Order, please," she said, tapping the gavel. "We'll begin with budget projections and necessary litigation expenses." I stood up. "Madam President, before we discuss spending, I have evidence that affects your authority to preside." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ruth's eyes narrowed. "You're out of order, Mr. Callahan." "With respect," I said, stepping forward. "I'm fully in order under Section 3.6 of the bylaws. Any member may raise matters of fiduciary concern prior to budget approval." I placed the binder on the podium beside her and opened it to the first tab. Term limits. "You've served 3 consecutive terms. The maximum allowed is 2. Every vote and fine since March 2021 is therefore invalid." The room erupted in murmurs. Ruth raised her hand, trembling slightly. "That's not—" I flipped to the next tab. "Here's the county inspector's report confirming your gate encroaches on private property. Here's the sheriff's record of your entry attempt on October 2nd. And here." I pressed play on a small tablet linked to the trail camera feed. "Is you, on my land, violating the same laws you claim to enforce." The screen glowed across her face, catching the moment she froze mid-motion under the sensor light. A collective gasp filled the room. The county deputy who'd investigated stepped forward from the back. "We have a verified trespass complaint," he said calmly, holding a file. "This footage matches our evidence. Neutral authority. On record." Ruth's composure cracked. "This is a misunderstanding." Leonard, sitting near the front, spoke up. "No, Ruth. We trusted you. You turned us into a lawsuit factory." For a long moment, the only sound was the whir of the ceiling fan. Then Daniel stood. "Motion to suspend all board powers pending audit." "Seconded," someone shouted. "Third," came another voice. Ruth looked around the room she'd ruled for nearly a decade. Faces she'd intimidated for years now stared back, eyes level, unafraid. Her gavel slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a dull clack. Outside, reporters waited by the gate. Cameras pointed at the chaos inside. The deputy handed her a citation notice. Plain, procedural, devastating. She didn't look up. That was visual beat number 1. The fall of power caught in the sterile hum of fluorescent light and the cold click of a citation pen. I didn't gloat. I simply gathered my binder, nodded to Marcy, and walked out into the cool night. The vines rustled behind the clubhouse like an applause only I could hear. Back home, I poured a whiskey and sat by the window. The porch light reflected off the envelope I'd left for the HOA's insurer, still unopened. Tomorrow I'd send it, the final nail. Before closing the laptop, I spoke to the audience again, softly. "So what would you have done in my shoes? Buy the leverage or go straight to court? Tell me in the comments. Every HOA tyrant goes once on silence, and silence is just unpaid rent to fear." At midnight, I sealed the insurer envelope and slid it into the outgoing mail slot. The sound of that metal flap closing felt like the first real peace in months. But peace, I'd learn, was just the intermission before the dominoes fell. By morning, the footage had gone viral. The local paper ran a headline, "HOA president caught trespassing on homeowners' property. Residents demand audit." The image they chose was unmistakable. Ruth's face lit by the motion sensor, hand frozen mid-pry. The caption read, "Caught by her own rules." Marcy called before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. "Congratulations," she said. "They just filed a temporary suspension notice with the county clerk. You're officially the most popular man in Silver Pines." "I never wanted fame," I muttered. "No one does. It just happens when the truth shows up on camera." The insurer responded within 48 hours, announcing a full review of all claims and reimbursements made under Ruth's tenure. Without coverage, the HOA's defense fund evaporated overnight. The board froze accounts, emergency meeting notices went unanswered, and suddenly the tyrants of yesterday were begging for procedural mercy. I kept my head down, documenting each move. Daniel handled neighborhood morale, checking on elders, making sure no one felt lost amid the chaos. "People are scared, Nate," he said one afternoon while we hammered a new post along my fence. "Not of you, of what they might find once we start digging." "Then we dig carefully," I said. By October 20th, the County Ethics Committee opened a file on the HOA for conflict of interest concerns. That was the domino I'd hoped for. Each letter of inquiry they sent was another tremor running under the board's feet. Then came the predictable counterpunch, a statement from Ruth's lawyer claiming malicious editing of the footage and retaliatory tactics by disgruntled raw residents. They underestimated the weight of a time-stamped sheriff's report and an independent inspector's confirmation. Facts don't blink. Knowledge nugget number 4. In HOA disputes, contemporaneous documentation, photos, videos, certified letters, recorded meeting minutes, trumps opinion every time. Regulators rely on timestamps, not tempers. The Silver Pines Facebook group exploded with debate. Half the comments were from residents demanding transparency. The rest were from outsiders, sharing their own horror stories. It turned into a national conversation about HOAs and property rights. I didn't reply to any of it. Let the facts do the talking. But online victory doesn't fix the street you live on. The community still needed structure, not just outrage. So I drafted a petition, simple language, plain paper, calling for a special election to install an interim board and initiate reforms, term limits, open financial audits, and a transparent records portal. At the next impromptu neighborhood gathering, Daniel read it aloud. The crowd clapped halfway through. "We just need 20 signatures," he said. We got 62. That night, the air smelled of rain and cut grass. I walked the lane alone, past porches lit with yellow bulbs. A few neighbors nodded, others waved silently. The fear that had once hung over this place had turned into something different: resolve. 2 days later, the HOA's vice president, a quiet man named Curtis, asked to meet privately. We sat on the clubhouse steps where everything had started. He rubbed his hands together. "I didn't know half of what Ruth was doing," he said. "The board wants to talk. Maybe end this." "I don't want blood," I said. "I want reform. Can we start there?" "Only if it's public." We set the date. October 28th, open forum, county oversight present. The same deputy who'd written the trespass report would attend a security sat and witness a neat symmetry of justice. The room filled again, but this time the atmosphere felt different. No tension, just expectancy. Curtis opened with a deep breath. "We acknowledge mistakes were made under prior leadership. We're here to rebuild trust." I stepped forward, holding a single folder instead of the thick binder. "I'm not here to gloat," I said. "I'm here to make sure none of us ever go through this again." I slid the folder onto the table. Inside were the reform terms. 2 term limits for all board members. Independent annual audits by a third-party CPA. Mandatory open voting and meeting minutes posted online. A 25% rollback of fines issued under the prior administration, refunded or credited. Establishment of a resident ethics committee to oversee future disputes. Curtis looked at me, then the crowd. "You're offering to drop all personal claims in exchange for this?" "Yes, but only if adopted unanimously tonight." He turned to the remaining board members. One by one, hands went up. Motion passed. The deputy signed as witness, stamping his initials at the bottom of the page. That was visual beat number 2, ink drying on the reform deal while rain streaked the clubhouse windows. For everyone watching, let me ask, when local power crosses the line, what's the right punishment? Fines, removal, or something restorative like this? Think it over and tell me where justice ends and rebuilding begins. Afterward, Curtis extended his hand. "You could have destroyed us," he said. "I didn't want destruction," I replied. "Just daylight." The deputy laughed quietly. "Daylight's the best disinfectant there is." Outside, the night air was clean, the gate open again, not by order, but by trust. The vines on my fence shimmered under the streetlight, free to grow without permission. But stories like this don't end with one vote. They echo. The days that followed felt quieter, like a long exhale after why. Years of holding my breath. No more patrol trucks, no more orange tags, no more anonymous emails. The gate that had divided us was now just another hinge between neighbors. For the first time in memory, kids were riding bikes through it again. No codes, no permits, just laughter over asphalt. Curtis delivered a public letter to every mailbox the next week. Silver Pines community is implementing a new era of accountability. Inside were the adopted reforms, each initialed and notarized. The ink still smelled fresh. He even added a personal note at the bottom. "Thanks for teaching us that governance without humility is just vanity in uniform." I didn't reply. I just folded it neatly and slid it into the back of the binder. Then came the aftermath, like dominoes finally reaching the end of the line. The State Department of Regulatory Agencies opened a small but formal review of Ruth's actions. Her husband's landscaping company lost the HOA contract within days. The association's insurer denied reimbursement for legal costs, citing fraudulent or ultra-vires acts. The number attached, $86,000, hit like a brick, and for once, that brick wasn't aimed at the homeowners. News outlets picked up the follow-up story. Silver Pines implements landmark HOA reforms. The photo showed me and Daniel planting a young oak near the community sign. A little messy, roots still showing, but alive. That became our first community restoration day. During one of those interviews, I shared a simple thought. Justice isn't about winning. It's about rebuilding trust where someone else broke it. That line stuck. A week later, the county paper printed it as the closing quote under the headline. I didn't feel pride, just a quiet satisfaction, the kind that hums under your ribs like a steady current. Around the same time, Marcy finalized the settlement agreement. It wasn't money I wanted, it was acknowledgement. The HOA issued a formal apology letter, archived permanently in county records, affirming that their prior actions were conducted outside lawful authority. The first paragraph alone was worth more than any check. Still, the house felt empty. Laura's wind chime rang softly at dusk, the sound of her ghost approving the peace I'd fought for. I sat under the trellis she'd designed, now lush again, and wrote a small note on a yellow pad. Protect what's fair, even when fairness costs you comfort. I pinned it above my desk. For everyone who's followed this story, if you believe I fought the right way and that this is how it should end, say a few words in the comments for your own community, your friend, or even that one neighbor who's scared to speak up. Subscribe so future cases like this reach you first. And share it. Not for clicks, but so someone out there learns it's possible to win without hatred. That part's on us. Winter came early that year. The first snow dusted the vines, turning them silver in the porch light. I brewed a cup of coffee and scrolled through an email from the county clerk confirming the HOA's amended filings. Beneath it, a new message popped up. Subject line, Inquiry, Homeowner Rights Advisory Panel. They wanted me to serve as a community representative. I smiled. Not bad for a man who'd once been fined for offense. Before turning off the porch light, I walked to the gate. The padlock was gone, replaced by a simple wooden sign carved by Daniel's grandson. Welcome to Silver Pines. Respect lives here. I stood there a while, letting the snow melt on my sleeves. Somewhere beyond the lake, I could almost hear Laura's laughter, faint but warm. Then I whispered, more to her than anyone, on to the next case. What changed after? Ruth accepted a plea deal for filing a false report, 1-year probation, restitution, and a lifetime ban from any HOA board. The community's new ethics committee published its first audit, revealing $1,300 refunded to overcharged residents. The insurer reinstated coverage under strict oversight. And every October since, the neighborhood hosts Founders Day, a picnic by the lake where kids paint little wooden signs reading private property, our common good. Visual beat number 3. A single deed-stamped folder closing under lamplight, the soft thunk echoing into silence. That silence finally was peace.